So you said something the other day about the mind being a microcosm of consciousness as such.
Yes.
Is that? And I guess I was wondering if you could elaborate slightly.
But all there is to the finite mind is infinite consciousness, albeit a limited form of infinite consciousness. Therefore, it is to be expected that our finite minds behave in a similar way that infinite consciousness behaves. In the same way that within the limits of this not very good metaphor, in the same way that a young child often behaves like her mother behaves. She is a product of the mother. So she retains within her many of the qualities and characteristics and features of the mother. She's come out of the mother. Well, each of our finite minds has come out of infinite consciousness. We are a microcosm of infinite consciousness, in infinite consciousness. And therefore it's to be expected that our minds would behave in the same way.
And so when the localized mind or the finite mind, when that mind's dreaming as such, is it either a localization and sort of focusing within that finite mind like a subset?
Yes. So
or is it
your mind, Jake's mind, is a localization of infinite consciousness's mind. And if Jake has a dream and dreams that he is Peter walking the streets of Paris, then Peter is a localization of Jake's mind. Indeed, if Peter checks into a hotel in Paris, falls asleep and dreams that he is John walking the streets of Rome, then John is a localization of Peter's mind, and Peter is a localization of Jake's mind, and Jake's mind is a localization of infinite consciousness. Did you ever watch the film Inception? It was beautifully displayed in that film, portrayed.
So, in a sense, consciousness.
In fact, I went to see that with my. Sorry to interrupt you. I went to see that with my son. As I said a few days ago, my son has never asked me a question about these matters. But I saw the film with him, and after the film, he was quiet for quite a long time, and he said, "Per, isn't that the sort of thing that you talk about?"
Maybe we should just put the film on instead. Inception.
Inception.
So, in a sense, consciousness formalizes a localized mind, which is then the subject, and then I've heard you say before, which I think is quite lovely, that then looks. So then, when the subjects, which is each of our finite minds, look out, we're looking out onto the mind of God as such.
Yes.
Which is the objective world that we see around us. And
just to clarify this, just as when Jake falls asleep in Titignano, he dreams that he's Peter walking on the streets of Paris. From Peter's point of view, the streets of Paris seem to be made out of something other than himself, other than his own mind. And the name he gives to that stuff is matter, everything outside mind. So from Peter's point of view, experience is divided into two parts, self and other, mind and matter. But from Jake's point of view, the entire dream, the streets of Paris and Peter, are the activity of his own mind. So through the activity of Peter's mind, Jake knows himself or perceives himself as an apparently outside world. What he's actually looking at is the activity of his own mind. It's why when somebody asks Nisargadatta, how is it possible to see God? He just said, look around you. Look at the world around you. That's what you're looking at, the activity of God's mind, the activity of infinite consciousness. It only appears to be a multiplicity and diversity of objects from the perspective of a subject. Now, you might ask the question, I hope you would ask the question, but in case you don't, I'm going to ask the question, well, why is it necessary for infinite consciousness to view its own activity through the agency of a finite mind? Why can't infinite consciousness just know the world directly? And the reason is this. So you are all now seeing my body from one point of view. And as a result, you get a very clear image of it. Now imagine that you could see my body partly from the point of view from which you are currently seeing it, but also from another point of view, let's say behind me. And you were to superimpose these two images on top of themselves and look at the image. The image of my body would begin to lose it would be blurred. And now imagine that you were to look at my body from 4 points of view in the room, and you were to superimpose, like superimposing an old-fashioned slide on top of each other, and then look at the single image that remained. It would begin to lose its form as a body. It would be a yellow blur. And now imagine 10 points of view, and 20 points of view, and 100 points of view. Now, if infinite consciousness were to know the world or the object directly, it would see that object from all points of view in space, including all the points of view inside that object. Now, what kind of an image would result? It would be total darkness. It would look like Malievich's black square. It would just be this dense blackness. So in order for there to be an appearance of objects, in other words, in order for there to be a multiplicity and diversity of form, that multiplicity and diversity has to be seen from a single point of view. And therefore this collapse of infinite consciousness into the finite mind is the price consciousness pays for manifestation.
A thought just came up. Do you think that may explain possibly some hallucinogenic experiences when people feel dissociated, so they get multiple points of view? I just thought that may well be a side note anyway.
Yes, it could be, yeah.
But so effectively so I guess that helps to point to the usefulness of looking into dreams, because when you're dreaming, in a sense, you're exploring the inside of your mind, really, that part of your mind that's not available during the waking state, and you're quite literally in your mind with no outside world as such.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, there's nothing wrong with exploring the content of your mind, the content of your dreams. That will give you information about the deeper layers of your own mind. Or if as I said the other day, some particularly luminous dreams which penetrate deeper than your own personal mind and access material from a region of your mind that is not personal to you but is shared, that is Jung's collective unconscious, then archetypal ideas and forms will appear in your finite mind. So that would be another value of exploring your dreams.
So would you say that dreams are rather a focusing or a localization of the finite mind, or rather a delocalizing back into a more porous...
A delocalizing.
A delocalizing.
The waking state is the narrowest bandwidth. Imagine a camera that is completely unfocused. Imagine an old-fashioned camera. You defocus the camera so that nothing is in focus. If you defocus it all the way, you just see a white blur. Nothing at all. That's unfocused consciousness. When you begin to focus, to begin with, just blurred colors begin to emerge. So consciousness is beginning to narrow. And because it narrows, this enables form to begin to emerge, because consciousness is beginning to limit itself. So it goes through a series of limitations, the collective unconscious, the personal unconscious, the dream state, and then the waking state is the narrowest state of the mind in which consciousness is focused and all the objects appear as discrete, independent objects. But because our minds in the waking state are focused on discrete objects, it comes at a price. We lose the knowledge that is available outside the compass of the waking state. So when we fall asleep at night, the reverse happens. The focus of the waking state begins to relax. And as the mind relaxes, it expands. And as it expands, what was previously outside the compass of the mind is now included within it. So content to begin with that is in the personal unconscious, that is in our minds now, but is not accessible to us now because of the glare of the waking state, becomes accessible to us. And in time, even the content of the collective unconscious, the archetypal forms and images, which are in our minds now, but are not accessible to us because of the exclusive focus of our attention on the objective content of experience, now becomes accessible. It's like, to use Bernardo Kastrup's analogy, the stars that we see at night, they're still there now. They don't disappear during the day, they stay where they are. But we can't see them, or rather, we do see them, but we don't know that we're seeing them because the glare of the earth illumined by the sun is so strong that we seem to cease seeing the stars. In fact, we are seeing them. So the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious is in fact known to our minds now. It is in our minds now. But we don't have access to it because in the waking states our mind have narrowed the focus of their attention.
And at what point during that narrowing does the first person perspective form? And is the idea, not the idea, but I guess the idea to take the first person perspective not only in the waking state, but be able to open up the first person perspective so that then you can experience what otherwise is not available because there's no experience of the...
All experience is experienced from a perspective. As I said, that there is no... Consciousness by itself cannot know the universe. It has to know any experience from a localized perspective. So there is nothing wrong with the finite mind or the ego or the self. It is the agent of creativity. It is the medium through which the one appears as the many. But it comes at a price, and the price is that as consciousness contracts into each of our finite minds, it loses the knowledge of its own being. It loses touch with its own innate happiness. And that is why in all finite minds there is this wound in the heart of all people. And the wound is the longing to go back to our origin, our longing to go home. Everyone bears within them this, the scent of happiness. And that is why all people long for happiness above all else. But this happiness has been veiled by this contraction of consciousness into the finite mind, so the happiness only shines as a glimmer, and usually from time to time in each of our hearts. But all anybody truly wants is for this glimmer to shine brightly and permanently.
I'm aware that I'm probably... maybe just one more thought. And then I'll leave it.
Okay, yes.
So as it sort of contracts to the waking state, and we have our normal waking state reality of things, we then go through the stages, as you explained, through the Vedantic, where we realize the subject is actually consciousness and not the body, mind, and world, and we reduce the body, mind, and world then to, sorry, translators, to
slowly, go slowly.
To thought, sensation, perception, reduce that to thinking, sensing, perceiving, to pure knowing. And as such, we're therefore taking the first person or our experience from what it normally is, feels to be, and we're sort of taking it to that broader perspective.
Yes.
And with that, I guess, opens up the potential to realize the broader aspects of mind and to therefore feel like in deep sleep and in dream states aren't any different from the most open state, because at all times the first person sits as consciousness. Does that make sense?
No.
Oh.
And at least not to me. But let's just wrap this up. You're right that the process of investigation or meditation is from objective experience, thoughts, sensations, and perceptions, back to the subjective knower. And we sometimes go through stages from thought to thinking, and from thinking to knowing, from perceptions to perceiving, from perceiving to knowing. We reduce and reduce and reduce our experience to its essential ingredient. The process of creativity is the same process, the same pathway, but traversed in the opposite direction. Where knowing assumes the form of thinking, sensing, and perceiving, and appears as a multiplicity and diversity of discrete objects and selves. That's why in the tantric tradition they say that the path that we take, the path on which we travel, is always the path on which we return. It's the same path traveled in two different directions.
Thank you.